Hey, if you've got a young pitcher, maybe your son is 10, 11, or 12, and lately he's been complaining about pain on the inside of his elbow, especially when he throws, then this episode is for you. Today we're talking about a little leaguer's elbow, a really common injury in youth baseball that a lot of parents don't hear enough about until it's already a problem. I'm going to break it down, what it is, why it happens, what to watch out for, and what to do about it. And at the end, I'll answer a few questions I get from parents about this injury, including when to worry, how long recovery takes, and how to make sure it doesn't come back. So if your kid loves baseball and you want to help them play for years, not just one season, make sure you stick around. Welcome back to the Mound Ready podcast, the show where baseball players, parents, and coaches learn how to protect their arms, build real strength, and get back to dominating on the field. I'm your host, Dominic Rangel. Let's jump into today's episode and get you one step closer to being Mound Ready. What's up, everybody, and welcome back. I am super excited to bring this topic to you, and it's one that I constantly see in the clinic in my youth baseball players. I wish that really was not true, though, but if you are watching on YouTube, make sure that you hit the subscribe button if you like what you're hearing, and if you're listening on an audio podcast for Spotify or Apple Podcasts, then make sure you hit the follow button so you can stay up to date with all the different youth baseball topics that I talk about each week. So don't forget that when you hear this sound, it's a bat. That means that we're moving on to the next topic and you need to listen closely for what's coming next. But enough about that. Let's go ahead and dive on in. The first thing that we're going to talk about is what is little leaguer's elbow. So let's just start with what you're actually dealing with. So little leaguer's elbow is also called medial apophysitis. It's an overuse injury that affects kids whose bones are still growing. It's an injury to the growth plate that sits along the inside of the elbow. And it usually happens between the ages of like 9 and 14. And like I said, it's only on the inside of the elbow. That's for little leaguer's elbow. Let me show you a picture of what that actually looks like. So on the inside of the elbow, this is the medial epicondyle. And when a kid throws over and over again with high force or poor mechanics, that growth plate can get inflamed or be even pulled away from the bone. This is an x-ray that I've seen before of a pitcher, and you can see in the right side image that there's a little bit of separation between the actual bone here and then the little medial epicondyle that sits on there. Basically, the part of the elbow hasn't really fully matured or closed. And in the case of little leaguer's elbow, it just can't handle that type of torque. And that's what builds up from the repetition of throwing. On the left-hand side here that you can see, this is what the growth plate looked like after roughly I think this one was 8 weeks of no throwing and just physical therapy. So we were able to still load the arm and the elbow, but just making sure that we were still respecting the fact that there was a growth plate injury there. So the injury might start off just as soreness, but if left untreated, it can turn into something more serious like an avulsion fracture where the bone actually pulls apart and it requires surgery. But the only true way to diagnose it is to get an x-ray or even potentially think about getting an MRI. Like in the picture that I showed, that's what the before and after look like. This isn't something that just happens overnight. It really builds over time. It's definitely an overuse injury. And if you're not watching out for it, I mean, it's really easy to miss. It really is just the increase in pain until the kid just can't throw and they're lacking in the amount that they can bend their elbow or they can't even really straighten their arm out all the way. It's usually just one big throw and then boom, it's like, oh man, I felt this huge pop on the inside of my elbow and now I can't straighten it. And a lot of times we point to that and we think, oh man, well, it was just one throw that happened. It was just a freak accident. When in reality, it's not. It's definitely overuse. It's over time. This is the sort of thing that kind of happened. And of course, nobody wants that. But now that you have a little bit of background on the little leaguer's elbow, let's go ahead and talk about some signs and symptoms that you want to be watching out for. So the big things that you really, really want to watch out for, these are going to be the most common red flags that I'm usually seeing when I'm talking to a lot of the patients and the athletes and then the parents. So the first thing is going to be pain on the inside of the elbow, especially right on that bony bump that we were talking about, the medial epicondyle. The second thing we're going to see is that they're going to have the pain with throwing, especially with higher intent throws or breaking balls. It's going to change the way that the force is distributed along the elbow. It's going to put the arm in a different arm slot, and then of course it can cause more pull along the inside of the arm because of the way that the forearm muscles are having to control the arm. If the third thing is if they can't throw at any distance, then I mean, obviously you have to immediately stop throwing. You can't just let them continue to throw through it. This is one of those diagnoses that it gets worse if you keep on throwing through the pain, and it eventually leads to that complete separation, which requires surgery. It's super rare, but I mean, it can still definitely happen. The fourth thing that we see is going to be swelling or reduced range of motion. You're going to want to make sure that, like I said earlier, the elbow shouldn't really be swollen a whole lot, but sometimes you see this huge, like grapefruit looking thing, and it's crazy. And like I said before, also that there's going to be a lack in the ability of them to be able to straighten their arm or to bend their arm all the way. The next thing you're going to see is a drop in velocity or command. They're going to have a really tough time keeping up with how hard they're throwing, and they're going to have a tough time also really controlling where those pitches are coming out and whether they're throwing strikes or not. And that's really tough for these kids because I mean, the biggest thing is like whenever they're throwing the ball, they feel very in control, and when we're talking to them, whenever they have this, they don't feel right. They say something feels off, or it just doesn't feel like my arm. And those are things that I hear very, very often. So some kids won't say anything until it really hurts. And that's why it's so important to pay attention to how they're moving. Are they changing their mechanics? Are they shortening their stride? Are they throwing with more hesitation? You as the parent, you're going to know. You watch them every single time that they're playing. And if suddenly they're like, they don't look like themselves, that's usually a sign that something's going on. You should probably think about really asking them just to make sure that you're not missing something and you're also bringing it to their attention. I mean, there's really nothing worse than feeling like you know something is wrong, but you just don't know what it is. And at this point, though, you just got some background on the diagnosis and you know what you're looking for, but really, like, why does this happen? And let's talk about it. Like, where does it come from in the first place? Well, there's really three big reasons. I mean, year-round throwing, poor mechanics or strength deficits, early specialization, focusing on baseball and only baseball from too young of an age. Some kids are playing for 2 or 3 teams at once. They do showcases, tournaments, and private training, and they never really rest. They never get a time for their muscles to recover, and the growth plate never gets a break. Think about that. Your bone is constantly getting pulled at, and over time, the tissue around it is just going to get irritated until it hits its breaking point. It only has a certain amount of capacity before either the muscle is going to tear or it's going to have a partial tear. We call those strains, or you're just going to totally separate the bone. And in these kids, the growth plate is the weak link. You're going to really pull at that growth plate. And I mean, I've said it before, but research shows that kids who specialize in baseball before age 13 are literally 5 times more likely to have a shoulder injury and 3 times more likely to have an elbow injury. Those are real numbers and they seriously do matter. So, like, don't those numbers just literally like blow your mind? I mean, every time I look at them, it literally just makes me think like we're really pushing these kids to the limit. But now that you know what it is, the things you're looking for, and potential reasons for why it's happening, let's go ahead and talk about some other things like how do you treat it once you start to know that they have it. So the good news is that in most cases, they don't need surgery. And thank goodness for that, because I absolutely don't want these kiddos to be having surgery this young. I mean, I've even seen it as young as like 8 years old, and that's just crazy to me. When I tell you the length of time it's going to take, it might blow your mind, but the big point is that I want you to remember that this is a growth plate injury and that it's not something that you want to mess around with or just kind of let it fester. This is a part of their bone, and if you really just let it sit there and hope that it goes away, then I mean, this is where their bone grows for the rest of the time that they're growing. And if you disrupt that, then I mean, it can have serious consequences. So we just got to make sure that we're on top of it. Here's really the typical approach that we use in physical therapy whenever these kiddos are coming into the clinic. So step 1 is going to be you're going to shut down the throwing. It's usually for somewhere around 6 to 12 weeks. We got to really focus on the healing. We got to regain some motion. If they're really not having any of those issues, I'm still going to focus on healing. Step 3 is going to be address any strength or mobility limitations. And we're not just talking about strength or mobility limitations in the elbow. We're also talking about like mobility limitations in the legs. We're talking about mobility limitations in the spine. We're talking about mobility limitations in the shoulder, and then strength. I mean, we have ways of testing them. I've talked about it before, right? We got to look at torque to body weight. We got to look at comparing how much strength they have in their rotator cuff compared to their body weight mass, like percent of body weight, and the strength velocity ratio. There's just so many different ways that we can test them and make sure that they're actually ready to start throwing again, which leads us into step 4, where we start a gradual return to throwing program. All of these are phased out, and you have to hit the criteria to progress to the next phase, because that's what's going to let us know that we're safely progressing them, and not just saying, okay, well, you've hit this amount of time, so now it's time to go to the next phase. That's not necessarily what we want. We're going to go back to this one right here, because the big thing that I want to talk about is that if there's been an avulsion fracture, meaning that the bone was actually pulled away, then the surgery is probably going to be needed. And that's like the minority of cases. But even if surgery is needed, the outcomes are usually pretty good if the recovery is done properly. You just have to make sure that you're going to somebody that actually knows what they're doing, because baseball is, I mean, the fastest moving sport in all of sports. And so you have to get the arm ready for that. And if you don't go to somebody that knows exactly what they're doing, then the kid may be stuck with the inability to totally straighten their arm out all the way. And that's terrible, because now they're going to be stuck with not being able to do everything that they want to be able to do, or even returning to baseball for that matter. But the one key here is that the longer the break from throwing, the longer the ramp up. You can't just go 8 weeks without throwing and then jump back into a tournament the next weekend. I mean, that's where the setbacks happen. I see this all the time. I've even seen it where I have a kiddo that I say, okay, we're going to start to do your return to throwing program. And then they come back the next time, and I handed them the program. And I said, this is what we need to do. This is how we're going to do it. And they come back the next time, and dad was like, hey, yeah, we had him throw in a tournament, but he only pitched at 75% of his 1 rep max. And he is not having pain on the inside of his elbow again. Like, what happened? And I said, well, that's, you totally went the off the plan that I gave you, right? So it's super important that we talk about this, because a lot of people think that this is just a very minor injury, and that it's not a big deal. But in reality, this is their growth plate that we're talking about. This is the area their arm continues to grow. I said that earlier in this video. And that's just really super important. And I keep stressing that over and over and over again, because I know that I just see and I hear it a lot, where parents are like, I didn't even know that this was a thing, or I didn't even know that this could actually happen to them. But I've really just given you a broad overview of what we do to treat it. There's definitely lots of important details, right? Like sub buckets of all the steps that I just gave you. But talking about all the ins and outs of this, the exact protocols, that would just literally take such a long time, and all my listeners would just lose interest, because I'm going to go into a ton of like detail about all the stuff that y'all don't really even care about, unless your child is actually going through it, which if that's the case, then I mean, you can give me a call and we can schedule the visit. But now that you know that you have this broad overview, just like I said, let's talk about what you can do as a parent. So here's where it all comes together. I mean, everything before this was all about education on what it is and what the process looks like. But as a parent, this is the most important section for you. If your son is a pitcher, or even a position player who throws a lot, and as much as you'd hate to admit this, the reason why they're having little leaguer's elbow isn't an issue isn't an issue. It is an issue with the amount that they're throwing, but here is how you can help. So the first thing that you have to do is you have to listen when they say that their elbow hurts. Don't just discount that, and say it's okay, you're fine, right? You have to really take that into account whenever they say it. You have to look at where it's at. And if it doesn't go away within that first 48 to 72 hours, you really need to get it checked. The second thing you need to do is you need to watch for those mechanical changes. I have a whole nother video on all the different mechanical changes that you need to watch out for. So go ahead and go to my page and make sure that you watch that one if you don't know what you're looking for. The third thing that we need to watch for is we need to track more than pitch counts, right? The number of teams, the bullpens, the warm-ups, the weekend tournaments, they all matter. It's not just how many pitches did you throw, it's all of the amount of throws, because your arm doesn't know whether you're pitching in a game or warming up or doing plyo throws, or even doing banded exercises for that matter. All it knows is that it's contracting and that it's having to absorb force. The next thing that we need to do is we need to prioritize the off-season strength work and not just more reps, right? So strength is literally the foundation. You have to make sure that the off season is the time for them to off ramp from all of the throwing that they've been doing over the course of spring ball, and then by the time they're ready to come back after summer, then their body's ready to tolerate it. Now, if they have different training or showcases or things like that in the summer, that's a whole nother topic where we bring in a strength coach and we bring in a pitching coach and we make sure that the entire plan is all set and it's correct and it's tailored to the person that's in front of us. The last thing that you need to do is you need to speak up, right? You got to ask coaches, you got to ask the trainers, and you got to ask providers what they're doing to protect your kid's elbow, right? This is a growing body. This is not a grown athlete, and you can't treat them like a grown athlete. They need structure, they need rest, and they need strength, and they don't just need skills. It's not all about skill progression. We just got to make sure that we're taking a holistic approach to this. They have to recover, and they need to know what to do for recovery. Maybe I'm going to make a video about recovery next. I don't know. That's a whole nother topic again. All right, we just got to have that foundation before we can start to build a house on top of it. If we try and start to overlay skills or teach mechanics on top of poor strength, then I mean, the house is going to continue to crumble, and the house in this instance is the arm. And so now that we've made it to the last little part of our video here, we're going to transition to the Q&A section. So this is something a little bit new, but I'm going to talk about the 3 most common questions that I get from parents whenever their child is coming in for Little Leaguer's elbow. So biggest question, does this mean my kid's baseball career is over? All right, yeah, absolutely not. In fact, like most Little Leaguer's elbow cases heal really well with the proper treatment, the amount of time that they take away from throwing, and then utilizing a plyometric progression and a smart return to throwing progression. It's only career ending if you ignore it, and then it turns into maybe like a surgery that doesn't go well, or it turns into it continuously happening because you're not actually doing all of the phases correctly. Question number 2, can my son keep playing through the pain if it's really not that bad? So if they're feeling it on every single throw, then obviously you got to make them stop. The first thing that I ask them is like, what distance can you throw? Because I know that they've been trying to throw. If they can't throw any distance whatsoever without the elbow being painful, then of course I'm going to stop them from throwing totally. And I might even take out hitting. It really depends on each kid that comes into the clinic because we have to base it off of where they are in that specific time frame, right? The pain is there. It's that their body's saying it's time to pause. The earlier we catch it, the quicker they can recover. Like I said, the protocol is somewhere between like 6 to 12 weeks. It really depends on like how quickly did you catch it and how quickly did you shut down. The pain has to go away, the growth plate has to start healing, and then you have to have the proper progressions in place. If you have somebody that's done it over and over, then it can happen pretty quickly and pretty easily. But if you're working with somebody that's never seen it and they're just kind of throwing darts at a board, hoping that they're going to hit the target, then of course it can get drawn out and delayed. Question number 3 that I hear a lot is, how do I make sure this doesn't happen again? Okay, big question. First and foremost, prioritize strength training. Track the workload across all teams and ensure they have a true off season. Don't rely on pitch counts alone. That's just like an intro to volume, right? We got to track recovery, throwing days, how their body's responding. That again is like a whole other podcast. I'm pretty sure I've talked about it on a previous podcast, all the different ways that we can track arms and make sure that we're progressing them really well. But that's a whole big topic. But the big thing is to wrap this up, right? Little Leaguer's elbow is common and it's not just part of the game. Not everybody gets it. And if it's happening, it's usually me hearing the parents say like they're the best pitcher on the team, which in most cases is true, but that's why they pitch so much and the volume is a lot higher. Or they say, we don't have enough pitchers, so my kid has to throw more often. Regardless, these are all big things that we want to watch out for, right? It's a sign that something needs to be addressed. And the earlier you act, the better the outcome. If your kid is showing any signs of what we talked about today, or if you're not sure what the strength or throwing plan should look like, then you can send me a message. You can text me too. You can text me at 210-390-6577, or you could drop a comment on this wherever you're listening, whether that's on YouTube or on a audio podcast. I try to answer to every single comment that's left. So my big thing is let's keep these kids healthy, let's keep them competing, and let's make sure that we keep them mound ready.